Opening hook, the rain came down in sheets that night, turning the city streets into rivers of reflected neon and shadow. Somewhere between the hum of distant traffic and the rhythmic sweep of windshield wipers, a single moment was about to unfold, one that would test the measure of two souls. She sat in her old sedan, hands trembling on the wheel, watching the red and blue lights paint the interior of her car in flashes of dread. The siren had gone silent, but the weight of it still pressed against her chest. Behind her, the patrol car idled, its headlights cutting through the rain like judgment itself. Officer Derek Brennan stepped out into the storm, his boots splashing through puddles as he approached her window. His face was hard, carved from years of seeing the worst humanity had to offer. He'd stopped caring about stories a long time ago. To him, everyone had an excuse. Everyone played the victim. But inside that car sat a woman who had never asked for pity. Her name was Grace Holloway, 43 years old, a nurse at County General, a mother of two, a woman who worked double shifts just to keep her children fed and her mother's medication paid for. She hadn't been speeding. She hadn't run a light. Her taillight was out, just one small bulb that had died that morning. And she'd been meaning to fix it after her shift. She hadn't expected this. Officer Brennan tapped on her window with the back of his flashlight, the sound sharp and cold. Grace rolled it down slowly, rain misting onto her face as the wind swept in. "License and registration," he said flatly, not bothering with pleasantries. She fumbled for her purse, her hands shaking. "Officer, now." The word was a door slamming shut. Grace handed over the documents, her heart pounding so hard she thought he might hear it over the rain. He took them without a word and walked back to his car, leaving her alone with the sound of water drumming against metal and her own shallow breathing. She didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning of something that would break her and somehow, impossibly, heal them both. Part 1. The setup Grace Holloway had learned long ago, that survival meant keeping your head down and your voice quiet. Growing up in the South Side, she'd watched her mother clean other people's houses, watched her father work himself to exhaustion in a factory that closed when Grace was 12. She'd learned that dignity wasn't loud. It was steady. It was showing up even when the world forgot your name. Tonight, she'd been driving home from the hospital after a 14-hour shift. Her scrubs still smelled faintly of antiseptic. Her feet ached. Her back throbbed. But her mind had been on her daughter's science project due tomorrow and the electric bill that was 3 days overdue. She'd been mentally calculating whether she could skip lunch this week to cover it. The streets had been slick with rain, the kind of October storm that rolled in fast and heavy, turning the city into a maze of brake lights and blurred reflections. She'd taken the back streets to avoid traffic, winding through neighborhoods she knew by heart. That's when she noticed the taillight warning on her dashboard. She groaned softly, making a mental note to stop by the auto parts store in the morning. But morning felt like a lifetime away. Then came the sirens. Her stomach dropped. She checked her speed, 30 in a 35. No reason, no cause. But she pulled over anyway, because that's what you did. That's what kept you safe. Or so she thought. Now, sitting in the rain with her documents in the hands of a man who looked at her like she was already guilty, Grace felt the familiar weight of invisibility settle over her. She was used to being overlooked, used to being underestimated, but she wasn't used to being afraid. Officer Brennan returned to her window, his expression unreadable. He leaned down, rain dripping from the brim of his cap. "Do you know why I stopped you?" Grace nodded quickly. "My taillight, I think. I just noticed it tonight. I was going to—" "You were going to what? Keep driving illegally?" "No, sir. I was going to fix it first thing in the morning." He looked at her like she'd just told him the sky was green. "That's what they all say." Part 2. The conflict. Officer Brennan straightened. his hand resting on his belt as he studied her through the rain-streaked window. Grace could see the way his jaw tightened, the way his eyes scanned her car, the worn seats, the rosary hanging from the rearview mirror, the hospital badge still clipped to her scrubs. "Step out of the vehicle," he said. Grace's breath caught. "I'm sorry?" "Step out." Her hands were shaking as she unbuckled her seatbelt. The rain soaked through her scrubs the moment she opened the door, cold and unforgiving. She stood beside her car, water streaming down her face, her arms wrapped around herself. "Is there a problem, officer?" Brennan circled her car slowly, shining his flashlight through the windows. Broken taillight. Expired registration sticker. Failure to maintain a safe vehicle. Grace's heart sank. "My registration isn't expired. It expires at the end of this month. That's 30 days. You should have renewed it already." I didn't realize. Ignorance isn't an excuse." He walked back to her, standing too close, his presence heavy with authority. Grace kept her eyes down, her body tense. She'd been taught never to argue with a police officer, never to raise your voice, never to give them a reason. "You know what the fine is for this?" Brennan asked. Grace shook her head, rainwater dripping from her chin. "Broken taillight, 200. Expired registration, 500. Failure to maintain vehicle safety, another 1,000. He paused, watching her face. "But that's just the start. There's also court fees, processing fees. And since you were driving at night with a broken taillight, that's a hazard violation. Another 3,000. Grace's knees nearly buckled. 3,000? Add it up. You're looking at a minimum of $5,000 in fines. Maybe more, depending on what the judge decides. The number hit her like a physical blow. $5,000. That was 3 months of rent, 6 months of groceries, her daughter's braces, her mother's heart medication. "Officer, please," Grace whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm a nurse. I work at County General. I just got off a double shift. I can fix the taillight tomorrow. I can renew the registration online tonight. Please, Everyone has a sob story," Brennan interrupted coldly. "You think you're special? You think you're the only one working hard?" Grace's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. "I'm not asking to be special. I'm just asking for mercy." Brennan stared at her for a long moment, rain streaming between them. "Mercy doesn't fix broken laws," he said. "I'm citing you. You'll get a court date in the mail." Part 3. The struggle. Grace stood there in the rain, the citation in her trembling hands, watching Officer Brennan walk back to his patrol car. The paper was already soaking through, the ink beginning to blur. $5,000. The number burned in her mind like a brand. She climbed back into her car, pulled the door shut, and sat in the silence. The rain drummed on the roof. The windshield fogged. Her hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles went white. She wanted to scream. She wanted to cry. But instead, she just sat there, staring at the red taillights of the patrol car as it pulled away, disappearing into the storm. How could this happen? She'd done everything right. She worked 60 hours a week. She paid her taxes. She taught her children to respect authority, to be kind, to never cause trouble. And still, here she was punished for a taillight she didn't even know was broken. Grace thought about her daughter, Amara, who was 12 and brilliant and wanted to be a scientist. She thought about her son, Elijah, who was 9 and loved drawing and had a laugh that could light up a room. She thought about her mother, who'd raised her alone and now relied on Grace for everything. $5,000 would destroy them. She would have to take out a loan. Maybe work more shifts. Maybe sell her mother's old jewelry, the only thing she had left from Grace's grandmother. Maybe skip meals. Maybe her phone buzzed. A text from Amara. "Mom, Where are you? I need help with my project. Grace closed her eyes, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. She typed back with shaking fingers. On my way, baby. I love you. She started. The car pulled back onto the road and drove home through the rain. But something inside her had shifted. Something had cracked. Not anger. Grace had never been an angry person. But something quieter. Something deeper. Resignation. She parked in front of her apartment building. An old brick structure with peeling paint and a flickering streetlight. She sat for a moment, gathering herself, wiping her eyes. She couldn't let her children see her like this. She had to be strong. Grace climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. Amara was at the kitchen table, surrounded by poster board and markers. Elijah was asleep on the couch, curled up with his sketchbook. Mom! Amara looked up, her face brightening then falling. Mom, are you okay? You're soaking wet. Grace forced a smile. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just got caught in the rain. But Amara wasn't fooled. She was too smart for that. What happened? Grace set her purse down, pulled out the soggy citation, and placed it on the table. We'll figure it out, she said quietly. We always do. Part 4. The turning point. 3 days later, Grace was back at the hospital, moving through her shift like a ghost. She smiled at patients, checked vitals, administered medication, all with the mechanical precision of someone running on autopilot. Her coworkers noticed. Lydia, another nurse who'd worked with Grace for years, pulled her aside during lunch. Grace, talk to me. What's going on? Grace shook her head. I'm fine. You're not fine. You haven't been fine since Monday. Grace looked down at her hands. At the wedding ring she still wore, even though her husband had died 4 years ago in a car accident. She twisted it absently. I got pulled over, she said quietly. $5,000 fine. I don't know how I'm going to pay it. Lydia's eyes widened. 5,000? For what? Taillight. Registration. They kept adding things. Grace's voice was hollow. I can't afford it, Lydia. I can't. Lydia reached across the table, squeezing Grace's hand. We'll figure something out. Maybe we can set up a fund, or no. Grace pulled her hand back gently. I'm not asking for charity. I'll handle it. But she didn't know how. That evening, as Grace was leaving the hospital, she saw something that made her stop. A patrol car was parked near the emergency entrance. And standing beside it, talking to a security guard, was Officer Derek Brennan. Grace's heart clenched. She thought about turning around, taking a different exit, but something made her keep walking. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the quiet strength her mother had always taught her. Or maybe it was something else, a small, stubborn flicker of dignity that refused to be extinguished. As she passed, Brennan looked up. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Grace did something that surprised even herself. She stopped. Officer Brennan, she said quietly. He straightened, his expression guarded. Yes? I just wanted you to know I fixed the taillight. I renewed my registration. Her voice was steady, calm. I'm not angry with you. You were doing your job. I understand that. Brennan blinked, clearly not expecting this. Okay, Grace nodded. I also wanted to say, I hope you never have to. Wonder what it feels like to choose between paying a fine and feeding your children. I hope you never have to feel invisible. Because that's what it felt like. That night, in the rain. She didn't wait for a response. She turned and walked away, her shoulders straight, her head high. Behind her, Officer Derek Brennan stood frozen. Her words echoing in his mind like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. Part 5. The act of kindness or courage. 2 weeks passed. Grace picked up extra shifts, working 16-hour days. She sold her grandmother's necklace. She skipped meals. She smiled at her children and told them everything was fine, even as the weight of the fine crushed her spirit a little more each day. Then, one Saturday morning, something happened. Grace was at the grocery store, carefully counting out coupons and checking prices, when she heard a commotion near the entrance. A woman was shouting, her voice shrill with panic. "Someone help! Please! My husband, he's not breathing." Grace didn't hesitate. She dropped her basket and ran toward the sound. A man was collapsed on the floor, his face gray, his wife kneeling beside him in tears. A small crowd had gathered. Frozen in shock, Grace pushed through. "I'm a nurse. Let me help." She dropped to her knees, checked for a pulse faint, irregular, and immediately started CPR. 30 compressions. 2 breaths. Again. Her arms burned. Her lungs ached. But she didn't stop. "Someone call 911. She shouted. A teenager pulled out his phone, his hands shaking. Grace kept going. Compressions. Breaths. Come on. Then, a miracle. The man gasped, his chest heaving, his eyes fluttering open. Grace rolled him onto his side, keeping him stable as the paramedics arrived. The wife grabbed Grace's hand, sobbing. "Thank you. Oh my God, thank you. You saved him. You saved my husband." Grace smiled gently, exhausted. "He's going to be okay. Make sure they check his heart at the hospital." As the paramedics loaded the man onto a stretcher, Grace stood, her scrubs dirty, her hands trembling. The crowd was clapping, but she barely heard it. She just wanted to finish her shopping and go home. But as she turned to leave, she saw him, Officer Derek Brennan. He was standing near the pharmacy section, still in uniform, his face pale. He'd seen everything. Their eyes met across the store. And in that moment, something shifted in the air between them, something unspoken, but undeniable. Grace picked up her basket and walked past him without a word. But Brennan couldn't move. He stood there, rooted to the spot, watching her disappear down the aisle. The woman he'd humiliated in the rain. The woman he'd fined $5,000. The woman he'd dismissed as just another excuse, just another story. She just saved a man's life without a second thought. Part 6. The realization Officer Derek Brennan didn't sleep that night. He sat in his small apartment, a bottle of beer untouched on the table, staring at the wall. He kept seeing her face. Grace Holloway. The way she'd knelt on that grocery store floor, fighting for a stranger's life with everything she had. The way she'd looked at him afterward, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with a quiet, unshakable dignity that made him feel small. He'd been a cop for 12 years. He'd seen it all, the liars, the criminals, the people who bent the rules and expected mercy. He'd built walls around himself, convinced that compassion was weakness, that everyone had an angle, but Grace didn't have an angle. She was exactly who she said she was. A nurse, a mother, a woman just trying to survive, and he treated her like she was nothing. Brennan pulled out his phone and did something he'd never done before. He looked her up. Not in the police database. He'd already done that the night he pulled her over, confirming she had no record, no warrants, no history of anything. But online, public records. He found her late husband's obituary. Killed in a car accident 4 years ago, leaving behind a wife and 2 young children. He found a news article about her volunteer work at a free clinic. He found a photo of her at a charity run, smiling beside her daughter. Every piece of information was another blow to his conscience. The next morning, Brennan did something he'd never done in his career. He went to his supervisor, Sergeant Linda Hayes, and requested the case file on Grace Holloway's citation. "Brennan, what's this about?" Hayes asked, flipping through the paperwork. "I want to review the citation I issued 2 weeks ago. I think I might have made an error." Hayes raised an eyebrow. "An error? You wrote her up for multiple violations. The registration wasn't expired. It was valid for another month. That's not grounds for a citation. You wrote it anyway." Brennan met her eyes. I was wrong. Hayes studied him for a long moment, then sighed. You want me to dismiss some of the charges? All of them, Brennan said quietly. Except the taillight. That was legitimate. But the rest, I escalated it. I was having a bad day, and I took it out on her. Hayes leaned back in her chair. Derek, you know, this kind of thing doesn't look good. Admitting you issued a bad citation. I don't care how it looks, Brennan interrupted. It was wrong. She didn't deserve it. Hayes was silent for a moment, then nodded slowly. I'll see what I can do. Part 7. Redemption or Forgiveness. 3 days later, Grace received a letter in the mail. Her hand shook as she opened it, expecting another bill. Another reminder of the debt she couldn't pay. But instead, it was a notice from the traffic court. Citation number 47,829 has been reviewed and amended. All charges, except vehicle equipment violation, broken taillight, have been dismissed. Your new fine total is $200. Payment arrangements are available. Grace read it 3 times, unable to believe it. From $5,000 to $200. She sank into a chair, tears streaming down her face, not from sadness, but from relief so overwhelming it hurt. Her children would eat. Her mother's medication was safe. They would be okay. That evening, Grace was working her shift at the hospital when she was called to the front desk. A visitor was asking for her. She walked to the lobby, and there he was, Officer Derek Brennan. Out of uniform, wearing jeans and a simple jacket, holding a small envelope. Grace stopped, her heart pounding. Officer Brennan, Ms. Holloway. He took a breath. I owe you an apology. A real one. Grace said nothing, waiting. I was cruel to you that night, Brennan continued, his voice rough with emotion. I saw you, and I didn't really see you. I saw another citation, another case, another person I could dismiss. But you're not that. You're everything I stopped believing people could be. He held out the envelope. This is a formal apology letter. And a check. For the $200 fine. I'm paying it. It's the least I can do. Grace stared at the envelope, then at him. Why? Because I saw you at the grocery store. I saw you save that man's life. And I realize you're the kind of person who runs toward people who need help, not away. You're the kind of person who shows grace, even when the world shows you none. His voice cracked. And I'm sorry I didn't see that sooner. Grace's eyes filled with tears. She took the envelope, but she didn't open it. Instead, she looked him in the eye. I forgive you, she said simply. Brennan's breath hitched. You do? I do. Because anger takes too much energy, and I don't have any to spare. And because I think you needed to learn something. Maybe we both did. She stepped forward and placed a hand on his arm. You're not a bad person, Officer Brennan. You just forgot, for a moment, that everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. Brennan nodded, unable to speak. Thank you, Grace whispered, for making it right. Part 8. The moral ending weeks turned into months. Grace never saw Officer Derek Brennan again, but she heard through a friend at the precinct that he'd changed, that he was kinder to people he pulled over, that he'd started volunteering at a community center, teaching kids about safety and respect. Grace didn't know if her words had truly reached him, or if something else had shifted in his heart. But it didn't matter. She'd done what she could. She'd shown him grace when he expected anger. She'd forgiven him when he expected bitterness, and in doing so, she'd freed them both. On a quiet Sunday morning, Grace sat with her children at the kitchen table, sunlight streaming through the window. Amara was working on her homework. Elijah was drawing. And Grace was simply present. Her heart light for the first time in months. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Thank you for teaching me what strength really looks like. Derek Brennan. Grace smiled softly and set the phone down. Amara looked up. Who was that, Mom? Just someone who needed a reminder, Grace said. About what? Grace reached across the table, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. That kindness is stronger than anger, and forgiveness heals more than punishment. Amara smiled, and in that moment, Grace felt the weight of the world lift just a little. She'd been broken, yes, humiliated, crushed under the boot of a system that didn't see her. But she hadn't stayed broken. She'd risen, not with rage, but with grace, because that's what her mother had taught her. That's what her faith had shown her. That's what her heart knew to be true. You don't defeat cruelty with more cruelty. You defeat it with compassion. You defeat pride with humility. You defeat darkness with light. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is forgive someone who hurt you, not because they deserve it, but because you deserve peace. Grace Holloway had learned long ago that the world wasn't fair. But she'd also learned that fairness wasn't the point. Kindness was. Dignity was. Love was. And those things, those quiet, powerful, unbreakable things could change a heart. Could change a life. Could change the world, one small moment at a time. The rain had stopped. The storm had passed. And in the stillness that followed, something beautiful remained. Grace.